Hi, Steve here with Norada Real Estate Investments. I appreciate you reaching out to us. You probably contacted us because you're interested in investing in turnkey properties outside of your own market, or maybe you don't have the time or the desire or the know-how or to do this kind of a business on your own, so you're thinking about going the turnkey route. This video is designed to give you a top-down approach as to who Norada Real Estate is and what you can get from it. So a few things about what we'll cover here today. I know you've got a ton of questions and we're going to answer just about all of them in this video. There's going to be a few stragglers for sure. Make sure you write those down as you go through the video so that when you and I talk and really get into the specifics of what you're trying to do, we can be sure to cover those. And I did this video not so that I could avoid talking to you, so that I could actually talk to you about the right things. I found that I was having the same conversation with investors over and over every week, when really what we need to do is make sure investors like yourself are prepared on the front end so that we can take time to focus on you and your specific goals instead of laying a bunch of foundational things. So this is a quick way to cover that and really cover a lot of these questions that I know that you're going to have. We'll talk about a history of Norada Real Estate, kind of where we came from. Then we're going to talk about selecting a market and what my role is in that with you and the kinds of things that you should be thinking about as an investor. We're going to talk about evaluating neighborhoods. What kind of neighborhoods should you look at? What kind of neighborhoods should you be concerned about? We're going to talk about teams, right? There's going to be different people that are involved throughout this process that are going to be a key role for you. So you need to know who they are and how to evaluate them. And then we're going to talk about the actual process front to back. What's it like buying a turnkey property? What are some of the common roadblocks that people run into? We'll talk about financing. We'll talk about property management, insurance, all those things that I'm sure that you have questions about here. So once again, thanks for joining us. I do need to keep the lawyers happy, right? Everybody spends too much time these days keeping the lawyers happy. So this presentation and your relationship with Norada is for education and referral purposes. We're going to teach you about real estate investing. We're going to refer you to some people that are going to be able to help you out along the way and make this a lot easier for you. We're not your real estate agent. We're not going to have an agency relationship with you. We're here for educational purposes and referral purposes. So there you go. Lawyers are happy. Let's get to what you came for. Let's get to the red meat. You probably want to know a little bit about who we are. And I found that most people that contact Norada Real Estate already know something. Maybe you found us on Bigger Pockets or online and you thought, oh, these guys are probably worth contacting. They have a good reputation. But you want some blanks filled in, so we certainly can do that here. Just a little bit of background. We've been in this business since 2004. Norada is essentially a California real estate brokerage. Most of our team is based out of California. I'm actually not, and a few others are not, but that's where really the epicenter of all this is. The funny thing is we don't have any properties in California, right? It's a terrible place to invest, and you probably know that. That's why you've contacted us. New York and Seattle, terrible places to invest. Awesome places to visit, but not great places to invest. So the way this works is Norada has on the ground in these various markets across the country what we call local market providers. And these are the people that go to foreclosure auctions, they buy short sales, they pick up properties from local wholesalers. They buy these properties through a variety of different means. And most of the time, those properties are pretty beat up, unless they're like a new construction deal. That's kind of the exception. We'll talk about that in a minute. The properties are beat up, so they'll go in there, they'll rehab the property. Then most of the time, they also have a property management company under their roof. So when that property is done being rehabbed, the managers take over and they screen the tenants and they place them and get them into the property and they collect the rents. And somewhere along this process, an investor like you is going to come in and you're going to acquire that property because you don't want to be the one to go to the auction in Memphis or Indianapolis, for example. You don't want to be the one to hire contractors and do permits and pull background checks. You don't have the time for that. That's why you contacted us. So we have these different people in these various markets across the United States. And we've been, like I said, we've been doing it since 2004. And we're pretty proud of that. We've been around a long time in this business. And it really is because we have a conservative investing approach, right? We like to be in certain kinds of markets. We take a basic approach so that if the market's going up, if it's going down, investors don't feel that too much. Obviously, the market crash from a few years ago, everybody still remembers, and investors certainly felt that no matter what. But if you did take a conservative investing approach before that, then you just kept on collecting your rents. Everything was fine. In fact, in many cases during the Great Recession of '08, rents went up for a lot of investors. We can talk about why that is in a minute. So as far as how Norada fits into the puzzle here, you've got to understand that in the turnkey world, there are promoters and there are operators. And I should first mention that I have a lot of investors come to me with an idea of what turnkey is. This is not something that's regulated. It's not something that there's a set definition about. A lot of people think they have the set definition of what turnkey is, but turnkey investing can mean different things to different people. So try to keep an open mind about that and don't get set into what it should be or what it isn't. Well, let's just talk about what's really on the table. So Norada can't possibly maintain contractors and all these different pieces of the puzzle and all these different markets. So we are essentially what's called a turnkey promoter or a turnkey agent or a turnkey marketing company. These local market providers that I mentioned before will come to us and they'll say, hey, Norada, we know that you talk to the Bob Jones or the Fred Johnsons of the world and that they want to invest in properties and we want to put our properties in front of them. And we say, well, that's fine, but you've got to meet a minimum standard here. We're not just going to put any property in front of our clients, in front of you. So we will vet them out. Background, what kind of properties they do, what kind of rehabs, what kind of management they do, just, the general smell test there to see if this is going to be a company that we're proud to recommend to our investors. We haven't been around since 2004 by recommending bad properties. So if they pass that initial background, then we'll allow them to place their properties on our website and we'll begin to talk to them or talk to investors like you about those properties. Or I misspoke there. Now, the idea is if you end up investing in a property, that turnkey operator is going to pay Norada Real Estate a referral fee. It goes to us, our brokerage in California. We get a referral fee. That's how we get paid. So you're not going to get an invoice from us. You're not going to get any bill from us. When you buy a turnkey property through Norada Real Estate, you can generally assume that that price includes a fully rehabbed property and you don't have to pay anybody any commissions. Only costs above and beyond the price of the property would be your closing costs with the title company, probably an inspection fee to a home inspector, appraisal, and I think that should do it. Closing costs, financing costs as well, right? Keep in mind title companies and lenders often have different opinions as to what that is, but closing costs and financing costs like lender points and fees that go to the lender for you to buy the property. So I hope that clearly explains the difference between a turnkey promoter and operator. Norada is a promoter, and I think the reason people like to invest with us is that allows us to be area agnostic. All right, we don't have to push properties in Kansas City at you, right? I mean, if we lived there and that's all we had, then yeah, that's what we'd have to do. That would be our answer to every question. Hey, Steve, where do I buy a property at? Oh, Kansas City. Well, what do you know? What a surprise. But Norada is agnostic. We can tell you what areas are working the best, what kind of feedback we're getting from our clients based in those areas, and generally make some good recommendations to you because of that. So a lot of people really like dealing with somebody like us because it allows us to be agnostic and we can just look at your overall investment plan and make recommendations like that. Just so you know a little bit about me, I've been in real estate my entire career. I've had a few detours along the way, but every time I've still come back to real estate. I was actually in college when I first got started in real estate. I was working for a property flipping guru, and this was back in 2002. It was a lot easier to flip properties back then. It wasn't nearly as competitive. I can't imagine what it was like in the 70s or the 80s, but it was a lot easier to do. It wasn't super easy, but certainly better than now. And at this time, I was in college. I was 12 credits away from graduating, but I was working for this guru and I was hearing all these success stories of investors. And I thought, I had to flip a few properties. I can pay for law school if I do that. I wanted to be hotshot attorney and all that stuff and make $500,000 a year like most attorneys do, or at least that's what I thought they did back then. So that was my plan. And a friend of mine and I put a house under contract and we were getting ready to close. I remember I was in class one day, really, really boring class, spring semester. It was starting to get warm outside again. Nobody wanted to be in class. And I got a text on this really old school BlackBerry that I had at the time. It was one of those BlackBerries that had the click wheel on the side. And it was 25 cents to send and receive a text message. I get this text and my friend says, "Hey, we just closed escrow. I got a check for you for $17,000. And I just sat there. It was quiet. I could hear the professor droning on in the background. I don't know how long I sat there for, but I was in college. 17,000 might as well have been 17 million as far as I was concerned. And a few minutes later, I got up and I left and I never went back. That was it. I've been in real estate ever since then, involved in single family properties. I've done raw land deals. I've done small apartment and small commercial deals. I've flipped a ton of houses. I used to own a company that did that here in my home market in Utah. And then I've done a lot of out-of-state hard money lending. And more recently, I'm involved in the development of new fourplex projects, along with helping turnkey investors like you acquire property. So that's a little bit about me, so you know who's talking at you. So if I haven't scared you off yet, then you're wondering, okay, well, what do we do now? What's the next step? And if you've listened to any of our podcasts that our founder and president, Marco Santarelli, has done, it talks a lot about what are called investment counselors. That's what I am. I help you throughout this process, and I'm basically your wingman to help give you referrals, help give you pointers along the way that help make this much more smooth process. And really where this starts is in selecting a market. There are a lot of markets out there. I don't know if this is the exact number, but I've heard there are over 400 different metropolitan areas in the United States. So for somebody to make a sweeping generalization that, oh, real estate investing is good or it's bad, that's hard to say, right? I mean, that really depends on what kind of market that you're in. And Norada only works in a few of these markets, partly because we can't find good operators everywhere, and not all markets fit what we like to call the big four. There's four key criteria that we're looking at when we're selecting a market. And the first one is the rent to value ratio. You probably know what this is, but just in case you don't, I'm going to explain it. Let's say that you bought a property for $100,000 and the rent on it was $1,000 a month. That rent equals 1% of your purchase price, or a rent to value ratio. And it's generally accepted in most circles, and most educators say that if you get a 1% rent to value ratio, that's good. If you use the right kind of financing, you buy a good property, you're gonna cash flow, and this is going to be hard to screw up, right? So that's something that Norada looks at extensively. The properties have to have at least a 1% rent to value ratio, and that's going to immediately eliminate most of the coastal areas of the United States. Some of the places in Florida and the Gulf are going to be okay there, but it'll knock out the entire Pacific coast and all of the Northeast. They just don't have a good rent to value ratio. So we don't focus on those areas. The second one, we need to have stable versus volatile markets, right? I had some clients back in 2003 that were buying real estate like crazy in Las Vegas. They were mortgaging themselves to the hilt. They were convincing family and friends to mortgage themselves to the hilt. And I'll tell you what, for a couple of years, they looked like geniuses. And they might be geniuses because they ended up selling those properties, I think in late 2005, made millions of dollars in profits. But the people that bought those properties from them, I'm pretty sure most of them went bankrupt or had to short sell off those properties, because we all know what happened to Las Vegas as we closed into 2007 and 8. The market dipped in some areas more than 50%. And that's not a good recipe for long-term buy and hold conservative investing. You need to invest in a market that, well, it doesn't go up a lot, but it doesn't go down a lot either. It's not volatile, right? It's going to stay steady. So if you use the right kind of financing, you pay your mortgage, you collect your rents, you're going to be, this is kind of a tortoise and the hare proposition. You're the tortoise, you're going to come out ahead. So most markets get eliminated because of that. A lot of markets in Florida and the southwestern United States definitely get eliminated because they're volatile versus stable markets. Here's another one that knocks out a lot, especially through the Rust Belt, upstate New York, right? They need to be landlord friendly. laws need to favor landlords, especially eviction laws. And there's some metros where they're not landlord friendly, but if you get outside of certain counties, then you can do better. For example, we have some properties in Chicago, and pretty much everything that we offer there is not in Cook County, right? Terrible, terrible landlord laws. If you're listening to this and you're from New England, or you're from the Bay Area or Los Angeles or Seattle, you're nodding your head right now, right? We like to joke that if you have a property in San Francisco and your tenant doesn't pay their rent, then they're going to live there forever. You're never going to be able to get rid of them. Conversely, in many of these markets, like in Texas, Tennessee, Georgia, Indiana, right, you're looking at 30 to 45 days, maybe 60 if it's a professional tenant, somebody who really knows how to game the system. The courts definitely side with the landlords. To them, it's something like, hey, you didn't pay your rent, you have a contract to pay rent, okay, time to get out. They usually do view it that simply in many cases. So, yeah, we don't want you hung up on a tenant that's not paying rent and you having to carry that mortgage for 8 months while that eviction works its way through the courts. We want that to be over with. Let's tear the Band-Aid off fast. And finally, number 4, these markets, they need to be diverse, and by that I mean economically diverse metropolitan areas. They have to have a growing and stable economy and a diverse job market, right? There are some markets out there that look really good. For example, I got approached a few years ago about doing executive modular housing in I think it was the Eagleford Shale region. Now, I might be wrong. I think it's either the Eagleford or the Bakken. One of them's in North Dakota. Right? It was in North Dakota. And wow, that was such a great idea when oil was at $4 a gallon. And now, not such a great idea. Granted, some of those companies are thriving again, but a lot of that housing went away. If you're dependent on one industry, what's going to happen to you if that industry suffers? So those areas tend to be more boom and bust. And hey, there's nothing wrong with riding a boom if you can forecast that. But when it busts, you're going to really wish you hadn't have done it. So we like places that have transportation and manufacturing and tech and medical and education, lots of different kinds of industries that help fuel them, so that you're guaranteed to pretty much always be able to find a tenant for your properties. So if a market meets those criteria, then we're willing to consider it. And that has led us to a few markets. And as I record this, you don't have to write this down, because you and I are going to talk about it. But currently, Norada has properties in most of the time in one way, shape, or form in Jacksonville and Tampa, in Atlanta, in Birmingham, in Memphis, in Little Rock, in Kansas City, in Indianapolis, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Salt Lake City. Those tend to be the majority of the markets that we function in, and we're in and out of them sometimes, and other markets we may add periodically. Those all tend to fit the bill. And I did mention Chicago. Chicago's the one that's a little iffy on landlord friendliness. You have to go into the right neighborhoods and outside of Cook County where it'll make a lot of difference. And then also, it's all in the property manager, which we have a good one there. So you're thinking about which of those markets you should invest in. And if you've done research so far, I probably didn't surprise you with very many of those names. It's no secret as to what markets fit the big four. Many people have caught on to this. But you've got to kind of consider which one is going to be right for you and your investment goals. So to make this a little bit easier to think about, I've chopped the markets up into 3 categories for you to better understand. And this is not an exact science. These are some generalities, but it's going to take some of the markets off the table so you don't have to wonder about so many things. So the first category of markets that I like to reference to investors, and remember, you're looking at this as, okay, which one of these best fits my goals? Which one of these am I most comfortable with? The first one is cash flow markets. And a common characteristic here is they usually don't go up a lot in value, but they don't go down much in value either. You're not going to invest here if you're making an appreciation play. Now, granted, most of our investors don't want to make any kind of appreciation play, but some of them say, hey, I'm willing to take a little bit of a chance to maybe get some of that. Okay. So they don't go up much. They don't go down much. The rents are usually high. The prices are usually low. Some examples are Birmingham, Memphis, Little Rock. Those are good cash flow markets. So the reason you would invest in one of these is if your primary objective every single month is to make as much cash flow into your bank account as possible. That's your main objective. Because that property that you buy for $90,000 today in 7 years might be worth $97,000. It doesn't go up a lot. But like I said, it's a good safe play because it doesn't tend to go down a lot either. So those are the cash flow markets. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the growth markets. And these, since the Great Recession, they've been growing more than they normally do. Prices have come up, and that's made the returns go down. Some examples of this are Dallas, Atlanta, Houston, Jacksonville, San Antonio. Those are some good examples of growth markets. So you can invest there. You can still get cash flow there. But you are going to be leaving some cash flow on the table in exchange for maybe getting some appreciation. I'll hedge heavily and say nobody knows that, myself included. Nobody knows that for sure if you're going to continue to get appreciation. But these are big markets with great economies that are growing, and the outlook is bullish for the foreseeable future by most people, myself included too. So usually what you see in those kinds of markets, remember, there are exceptions. Anytime I throw out numbers, there are always exceptions to that. But typically purchase prices of, I would say 110 on the low end, up to as high as 200,000. And these, they tend to be a little bit better neighborhood. The rent to value ratio usually is right around 1%. You may even dip to 0.9 or 0.8 if you go into Florida or Georgia, especially. Okay, so those are the growth markets. You're going to invest there because you want some cash flow, but it's not a huge deal to you right now. It's not like you're trying to live on it yet. You want a good return on your money, and you would like it if the property continued to go up in value, so you're going to take a chance there. Another funny answer to that is, I've had investors purchase in those markets before because they've got family there, and they just think, I'll take a little bit less of a return because when I go there to visit family, I can write it off. That's probably true. That's between you and your CPA, of course, but some investors have looked at it that way, and they've said, that'll make up for the shortage in the cash flow because I'm going there every year. I might as well be able to deduct it. So finally, we have what are called hybrid markets. If you listened to what I said about the cash flow markets and then the growth markets, and you're going, I kind of want something in the middle, then this is probably the one for you. Places like Indy and Kansas City are a couple of examples. Those markets and those metros are diverse. You have houses there that are very similar to that bread and butter house that you'll get in Memphis, Tennessee, which you buy for $80,000 or $90,000, and maybe you get a little bit better rent to value ratio on it. Conversely, you'll have stuff that's similar to what you would get in Dallas, but you just don't have to pay as much for it, right? So it's that middle ground. You get a little bit better cash flow than you would in Dallas, but not quite as good as you would in Memphis. You get a little bit better appreciation than you would in Memphis, but not quite as much as you would in Dallas. Good middle ground. And I've seen deals in hybrid markets, like I said, for as low as $60,000 and as high as $150,000, $160,000. But generally, they're right around in that $100,000 range in most cases. So those are some macroeconomic factors, right? Everything I said, for some of you, you may say, okay, I'm all in. I'm all in on Indianapolis now or somewhere else. You've made up my mind. Others are saying, well, all right, you knocked off a few that I'm no longer interested in, but I just can't decide between Memphis and Birmingham, right? Or you might just be totally confused still. Okay, I've seen all three kinds of those reactions, and that's fine. So I'm going to help you get unconfused now because we talked about macroeconomic factors. I want to talk about two important key microeconomic factors. The first one being neighborhood type. Now, if you've spent any time on our website, you know that Norada gives every single property a neighborhood grade. And that scale ranges from C- on the lowest end on the way up to A+ on the highest end. There is a lot of information online and in articles and on podcasts out there. People throwing around the terms, that's an A neighborhood or that's a B neighborhood. The challenge I have with that is, well, how do we know we're even having an apples to apples conversation here? Are we even talking about the same thing? Because kind of like the definition of turnkey properties, there is no perfect definition for neighborhood grading. All I can do is tell you how we do it, So at least you know what rules you're playing when you look at Norada's neighborhood grading system. So the way we do this is we've got a third-party data source that gives us the ownership percentage in each of the neighborhoods where these properties are. And it can tell us, hey, most of the people on this street own the properties that they live in. Or, hey, very few people on this street own the properties that they live in. They're all renters on this street. And so if we have a high ownership percentage, then the neighborhood grade is going to be A or A+. If we have a low percentage, it's going to be C or C-, and so on and so forth, up and down the scale, right? B tells you it's kind of middle of the road. And that's really all that it directly means. It's a function of ownership percentage, right? That's all we mean when we say that. Now, there are some things that you can probably indirectly assume about those neighborhood grades. And I should mention before I get into that they're probably about where they need to be 80 or 90% of the time, right? Because remember, that ownership percentage is based on geography. It's the distance from the property. And in some of these, especially Midwestern markets, the neighborhoods are highly pocketed. They can change a lot faster than they can in, say, Los Angeles, right? So if you're basing the neighborhood grade off of the owner occupancy in a certain radius of distance from the property, but neighborhoods change quickly, that could be misleading. I think that the market where I see the neighborhood grade off the most is probably in Memphis, right? The other markets, they tend to do okay. So let me tell you a little bit about some other things that you can probably assume, right? Not always, but they're a good guide, because I don't want you to get hung up too much on the neighborhood grade. It's a good reference point, but you still need to dig into some other things. So, for example, on A properties or A neighborhoods, you can generally assume that those are going to be more expensive, right? They're just going to cost more. I do not see neighborhoods that get A grades where the properties cost $50,000, right? I don't see that. In fact, on average on our website, you'll notice that A neighborhoods usually cost over $100,000. Almost always 120 and up. Not always, but that's something to use as a benchmark. You can usually assume about A neighborhoods that they have a little bit better school system. Now, we're talking investment grade turnkey rental properties. You're not in the top private school district of Beverly Hills here, right? But as far as the neighborhood, as far as the metro, it's a good school district. Tenants who want to rent and want to pay that amount, they're going to move to that kind of a neighborhood. You can generally assume that there's lower petty crime, right? The cops get called to that neighborhood less, and you can probably assume that it holds its value and goes up more. Right, those are some general things you could think about A neighborhoods. I like to compare it to taking a vacation, right? Buying a property in an A neighborhood is like going on vacation with your significant other to Tahiti first class. It's expensive, but it's pretty awesome, right? You're going to have a good experience. You're paying for that. You don't want drama, right? That's what you're trying to get away from. So you go into an A neighborhood. And you and I can talk about, when we chat on the phone, some other advantages that I feel there are to A neighborhoods, like the lower vacancy rate. Usually there's lower repairs on your tenant turns. You tend to get more tax benefits by being in A neighborhoods because there's more to depreciate. And that's some stuff we can talk about later, but that's a rundown on those. Conversely, a C neighborhood, right? C neighborhoods usually are priced at under $75,000, right? And I've got the C neighborhood slide open here. I got talking and forgot to change the slide, right? Cheaper prices, higher rents in comparison. They look really good on paper, right? In fact, new investors come to me all the time, and they like to treat these investment properties like it's a treasury bill. It's some kind of guaranteed return. A C property is far from a guaranteed return. You're going to have higher vacancy. You're going to have higher turnover. I don't think these are good properties for most new investors. Investors who are on the ground or have a really thick skin, who can handle things going wrong, right? They do well with C properties. You do tend to run into some financing issues. One thing you should be aware of is that many lenders, not all of them, have a minimum loan amount. So if you're buying a really cheap property and you want to use conventional financing, you got to make sure that you're going to achieve your lender's minimum loan amount, or you're chasing your tail here. You're chasing a deal that you can't get done. So like I said, they're usually priced at about $75,000 and under. And remember, I told you that buying a property in an A neighborhood is like going to Tahiti first class. Let me tell you what C neighborhoods are like. My wife and I, we have 4 kids, and every now and then we trick ourselves and we think it's going to be a good idea to take our kids on a road trip. And we pile all the kids in the car, and we've got all these elaborate plans about where we're going to go. We're going to stop for gas here. We're going to eat there. We're going to do all this. And about 20 minutes into the road trip, every time, right, the plan just goes completely into shambles. I read a management book written by some Navy SEALs recently, and they have a statement that says, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Right? You make this plan, but as soon as you run into the enemy, okay, plans change. And as soon as you put 4 kids in the car on vacation, plans change. C properties or C neighborhoods, that's a minivan trip to Disneyland with 4 kids in the car. It might be fun. It might be worth it. But it rarely goes exactly the way that you expected. You have to have a much thicker skin to invest in those kinds of properties. If you figure it out and you do have a thick skin, you're going to be able to cash flow really, really well. You're really going to like those. But I tend to recommend to most new investors to stock up on the A's and B's before they move into the C properties. And I already kind of covered this. A neighborhoods, right? More expensive prices. They don't look great on paper, but it's a tortoise and the hare proposition, right? Like those markets I talked about. Lower vacancy, lower turnover. I think it's a better use of your financing, which we'll get to in a few minutes. And those are probably on the very bottom end, $110,000 and up. Whereas the C's, remember, $70,000, $75,000 and under. And of course, investors go, well, tell me about the B's, right? Maybe I don't want to pay as much as an A, but I want to have a little bit more certainty in my life than with a C. And you might like B neighborhoods, right? These tend to be kind of blue collar neighborhoods, but they're people that are working. You have less of a Section 8 influence. You have less, just people that can afford the housing a little bit better, right? C neighborhoods are very, very low income, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to know what that entails. And they're kind of like the hybrid markets, like I told you. They're in the middle, usually priced in the mid to high 70s, up slightly above $100,000. Yeah, they can look relatively good on paper, right? Better than A's, and they're still easy to finance, right? Lenders still like those. You're going to run into fewer problems when you invest in B neighborhoods. So I hope you take all that into account. I hope you look at that and go, okay, the markets, the kinds of neighborhoods, is this clarifying the picture for you at all? And if not, I'm about to clarify it some more, right? One qualifier that I personally use, and you don't have to use this, but this is something that I do. I've purchased a couple properties in the last 90 days. My personal qualifier is, if there's no retail value in the neighborhood, I don't buy it. What retail value means is if I get tired of owning this property, can I put a couple $1,000 into it and refresh it? Some updated hardware, some flooring, make it look good, hire a realtor to go pound a sign in the lawn, and a family is going to get a mortgage and they're going to move in there with their kids, and they're going to pay me close to, if not, my full price for the property. That's what retail value is. If I put it on the market and I get a bunch of lowball cash offers from investors and that's all I get, and there's no family that wants to come along and get a mortgage, then that doesn't fit my criteria. And coincidentally, that's probably right about where the line is between B and C neighborhoods. In B neighborhoods, I still see retail value. In C neighborhoods, it's just investors going back and forth with properties. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you know what you're getting into, as long as you know what it really is. Okay, so that's one personal qualifier that I use. And finally, another microeconomic factor that I use. So remember, we talked about macroeconomic factors. Those were the markets. Is it a cash flow, a growth, or a hybrid market? Then we talked about, okay, I'm more of a cash flow market guy. Do I want to buy in A, B, or C neighborhoods? And then the final wild card here is the quality of the operator. This is where we can really, really help you, where people really tend to get an advantage out of working with Norada Real Estate. So I told you at the beginning of our little video here that these turnkey operators in these places like Kansas City and Birmingham come to us and they say, hey, we know you talk to the Bob Jones and the Susie Johnsons of the world. We want access to them. We say, that's great. And we do due diligence on these providers and we vet them out. And even after going through all of that, right, I'm sure it's not a shock to you that some of these operators are just better than others, right? We have a good history with them. We've been doing business with them for a long time. That's one thing to consider. Just ask me and I can tell you what our history has been with a specific provider in a specific market. I can tell you about the quality of rehab. How are the inspection reports coming back for other investors? Are they a disaster or do they come through okay? I can tell you definitely about the quality of the property management, right? If an investor of ours closes on a property and that property manager turns out to be an idiot, believe me, we hear about it. We know. And we help. But one way we help is we stop other investors from wandering into that property management company because that's not going to be a good experience. And also professionalism, right? Anybody can get into real estate. It's not that hard of a business to get into, right? And so that means some people that, they're not good communicators. They don't email very well. They don't get back to people in time. They just don't inspire a lot of confidence. I think the good term is, it's something that they use in the medical field. There's no bedside manner, right? They don't inspire confidence that you're doing a good thing here. They're not getting back to you and communicating. When you're investing your hard-earned money here, you certainly want to work with somebody who is professional. Now, I'll tell you, obviously, somebody that's got red flags all over the place on all these criteria, they don't last long with us. We fire them. We get them off the website. We can take the hint, right? Generally, they don't make it past that in the first place, but some of them are pretty smooth talkers. And we don't know what we really have until we get down in the trenches and start doing deals. But, so some of these, they do a good enough job. But if I've had a few complaints about one of these areas, I'll let you know. Others, I'll say, I get great reviews across the board. These guys do a good job. They're a great turnkey operator. And just because somebody is a great turnkey operator doesn't mean you're not going to have problems here and there. But you're going to notice quickly if you're dealing with a great turnkey operator and you run into a problem, because this is real estate, right? It's never going to be like a treasury bill. There will be problems at some point. A good turnkey operator communicates with you and they solve the problem. That's all, right? That's all we need to do. I'm sure you would agree. I tell our operators all the time, look, our clients are smart people. They get it. They can handle bad news. They can't handle no news. If there's something going on with the property, you cannot over-communicate. There is no such thing as over-communicating. So feel free to ask me when we chat, hey, Steve, what are your favorite providers? Who's doing the best job right now? And I'm happy to give you unfiltered feedback that I'm getting from our clients, because Norada's business model, we've really tried to align our interests with yours. If you're investing in properties and you're cash flowing and you're happy, we know that you're going to invest in more properties. And if that happens, we make more money, right? So if we're all making money, then we're all making money. And that's a good arrangement for everybody. But if it's a bad experience for you, that's not good for our reputation. You're going to tell your friends. You're going to not come back and buy more property. That's bad for us. We don't have any incentive whatsoever to put you with bad providers. So that's why we fire the really bad ones very quickly and try to be as transparent as possible with you about what the experience has been with the other providers. So what we talked about so far, we talked about macroeconomic factors, remember, about cash flow markets, hybrid markets, growth markets. Then we talked a little bit about the kinds of neighborhoods that you have the options of investing in. And then we talked about the quality of the operators, right? And I would say 9 investors out of 10 tell me, hey, Steve, really my most important criteria here is I want to be with a quality operator. If it makes me go from a market different than what I originally wanted, that's fine. Quality of operator is priority A1 Other people say, you know what, I really got to be in X market because of whatever reason. I'm willing to put up with a little bit of headache. If I think that's what you're headed towards, I'll let you know. But any providers that are just not what I would consider top of the line, we can still get good properties from them. That is something that they do have in common. The properties are good. We got to slug it out through escrow. We got to put up with some bad communication here and there, right? We can do that. I'm going to try to discourage you from it because I don't think you're going to love the experience. But if you have to be in a certain market and we don't happen to have a very good provider there at the time, I'm going to tell you. Okay? So that's all fine and dandy, but many times this comes down to the money, right? It comes down to Mr. Green. You probably have questions about this. So there are a couple kinds of financing when it comes to investing in turnkey properties. And the number one type that most people use is conventional financing. We call those Fannie Mae loans, right? And the typical terms for those are you put either 20 or 25% down. It used to be that the first 4 loans that you did were 20% down. And after that, Fannie Mae would want 25% down. We have seen them starting to get away from that a little bit more, where some of the preferred lenders that we work with can get you maybe all 10 of your loans at 20% down. So be sure to ask me about that, and we can refer you a lender that could accommodate that if that's something that you're concerned about. I should mention that on multifamily properties like duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, you're not going to be able to put 20% down on those. Now, if you've talked to a lender that has the words, yes, I can do 20% down on a fourplex have come out of their mouth, then please introduce them to me right away. I want to meet them, but I'm not aware of anybody that can do that. I've had lenders that don't know what they're doing tell clients that can be done, and then when we get into underwriting, it all comes out, and the client's very upset. Okay, so typical trades conventional, 20 to 25% down. You should usually plan on anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 in out-of-pocket closing costs, above and beyond the 20 to 25% down. So I generally tell people that to do a turnkey property through Norada, you should have about $20,000. Granted, you can go in more, but that's probably about the floor to be able to do your down payment, your closing costs, and leave a little bit in the bank, right? So that you can be conservative about this, have some in the bank for future emergencies, or if you have an unforeseen maintenance item, which you're not supposed to, but remember, these are people and houses. Sometimes things don't go exactly according to plan. One thing to remember is that Fannie Mae loans, you can get up to 10 of those in your name, right? And one thing I see a lot of investors really take advantage of is if you're, for example, a husband-wife couple, and both of you work, both of you can qualify for financing, it's a really dumb idea to put both of you on the loan because it's counting as one of your 10 Fannie Mae slots for both of you. So you have one property taking up 2 slots, right? This is the best kind of money for most people when it comes to acquiring single-family turnkey properties. So you'll have husband go on title on the first one, wife on the second, so you can actually stretch out your Fannie Mae loan capacity to 20 loans. Okay, so that's something that I recommend doing if you do have that option. Now, if you both can't qualify, right, you got a stay-at-home dad or something doesn't work, then it's a moot point. But I still actually think you should only go one of you on title because what if the other spouse starts working in 5 years and now they can qualify? Now you just opened up 10 more loans that you can use to acquire properties with. And as I record this can certainly change. The interest rate's around 5% on a 30-year fixed loan. Just know that the interest rate for investment properties, or what lenders call non-owner occupied properties, it tends to be 0.75 of a point or so higher than the rate you're hearing for owner-occupied loans. So the guy on TV talking about Quicken Loans saying, oh, we can get you in for X percentage. You're probably going to be at least 0.75 of a point higher than that on investor property loans. We have a few lenders that we work with that do a really great job working with investor clients. If you want to use your own lender for a turnkey property with Norada, you can do that, but there are a few things that you need to watch out for. Number one, I kind of alluded to this earlier. A lot of lenders will say, oh yeah, I can do an investment property. And then we get into underwriting, it all falls apart, right? They thought they could, but they can't really. In their eagerness to get the business, they overpromised, right? Make sure they tell you, yep, we do investment properties all the time. Very common practice for us to do, shouldn't be a problem. But also, you got to consider the licensing, right? If you live in San Francisco and you've got a really great loan officer at the credit union and you go in there and tell them you want to buy a property in Memphis, Tennessee, they're going to look at you cross-eyed. They're not going to be able to do that deal. You got to work with a lender that is licensed in the state where you want to operate. Like I said, you don't have to use the lenders that we recommend. I think it would be a good idea if you did, because typically they're licensed everywhere that we operate, and they are very investor friendly. They know the sellers that we work with, and they can make this a very smooth process, and they're certainly very competitive. We don't receive any compensation on the lending front. We can't, right? We're not licensed lenders. We're just referring lenders to you as a matter of convenience. So I would recommend you allow me to put you in touch with two of them. Talk to them, learn about rates, what kind of closing costs you can expect, what kind of process you can expect. And you know what, for lack of a better term, whichever one gives you more warm and fuzzies, go with that lender. Because at the end of the day, they're usually giving you about the same product. A 30-year fixed rate, fully amortizing mortgage at a competitive rate. That's all you're looking for here. Okay, so I talked to you about licensing and some of the common pitfalls, right? Some of these lenders have a minimum loan amount that they'll do, right? Make sure that if you're married or if you've got a partner, I think you should go on title separately, but talk to the lender about that. They're going to have some good strategies for how you can maximize your financing, because those 10 Fannie Mae loans that every person can get, that's a valuable commodity. Acquiring properties after you use those up, we can help you do that. We have different portfolio lenders and things, but you're going to have to put more down. The interest rate's going to be more. So kind of the intermediate goal for every investor here is, well, let's max those Fannie Mae loans out, right? Let's use as much of that cheap money as we can and get you into properties. So that's financing. Now let's talk about the process as we go into the home stretch here. I know I've given you a lot of red meat here today, but a lot of people still want to know, well, what's going to happen, right? Well, the first thing that you need to do, if I have not scared you off here today and you want to continue the conversation, obviously get in touch with me so we can set up a time to talk. And at the bottom of my email, you'll see a link to my calendar. You can jump on there and that knows what time zone you're in, and you can pick a time that works for you. When I'm coordinating with 10 people every single day across multiple time zones, I really got tired of emailing, hey, I have 3:00 tomorrow available, and then somebody else took it. I just like having the calendar thing in real time. So set up a time if I haven't scared you away yet. And we got to get you pre-qualified and introduced to some lenders, right? The lenders will do a call with you. They'll talk about the process. You go with whichever one you like. They'll give you a pre-qualification letter. It'll say, Susan is pre-qualified for $120,000 of financing. You usually don't need to pay a lot of attention to that $120,000, right? They've looked at your credit, and assuming you've got the down payments, you could do one for $170,000, but they usually all just kind of put a blanket number in there that they feel is typical of most turnkey properties. So as long as you got the pre-approval letter, you're good. You don't have to, most of the time, don't have to pay too much attention to the number that they put on there, unless they specifically tell you that. They might say, hey, the most you can go personally is 80. If they tell you something like that, then you need to tell me so we know what markets to focus in. Then we got to decide on a market. What kind of neighborhood, right? What kind of provider? You probably have made a lot of progress on that today, and I can certainly help answer a few questions about that when you and I talk. We'll do an intro to the turnkey operator. This is sometimes done via email. A lot of times I like to do it via conference call. I figure, you know what? You're going to meet these people. You're going to be working with them. You might as well know if you can stand to be in the same room, right? If you like these people, if you like their backstory and how they tend to do business. They all vary a little bit. They all have different property management processes and fees and different kinds of work that they'll do to the properties. So we need to get familiar with that once you've decided on a market. And then we're going to choose a property, right? If you like what you heard from the turnkey provider, it's time to choose a property. And that could be right there, right then on the call. They may say, I have one on Elm Street coming available. Or you might sit put, or you might stay put. I tried to say sit tight and stay put at the same time. It didn't work out too well. So you're going to look at the property on our website. You may see one on there, or via myself or the turnkey provider, we may tell you about a property that we know about that has not hit the website yet. In fact, I think probably 60% of the properties that my clients invest in never make it to the Norada website. It's because the market is really hot right now. So you'll choose a property. You'll say, I'm ready to move forward. So what's going to happen is it's customary for turnkey providers, when you say, I'm ready to move forward, they'll put a courtesy hold on the property. They say, okay, great. And that courtesy hold, it can vary. Some of them will tell you it's for 24 hours. I would think that they're mostly going to give you a couple of days. And that's for them to prepare a purchase agreement and send it to you for you to review it, right? I'll tell you some things to watch out for in that purchase agreement, like inspection and appraisal contingencies. Those are the things that make you not pay too much for a piece of junk, right? They're key things to have. But, what's not common is for you to request a purchase agreement, say, I want that property, so that you can continue to do a bunch of research and sit on the agreement for a week. That is not a good move. That's bad real estate etiquette. If you get sent a purchase agreement, you should be asking for it because you're 90% sure you want to buy that property, because you are taking it off the market when you ask for a purchase agreement. So ask us, ask them if you have any questions about the agreement, promptly sign it, return it to the seller as soon as you can, because you are, like I said, you're going to have that inspection period. If the inspection comes back and it doesn't look good, you can pull out of the contract. If the appraisal comes back and it's too low, you can pull out. And I'm going to give you some resources on how to learn more about those things. So once you've signed the purchase agreement, then it's time to send in an earnest money deposit. And this is something that you don't wait weeks to do either. Right? Time is of the essence. That's a phrase that is used in most state real estate purchase agreements, right? You're going to try to send that in within a couple of days of signing the agreement, right? Or send our property seller a picture of the check saying, I got it in the mail, or send them a notice saying, hey, I just wired the money to the title company. And they're going to introduce you to the title company. That's who sits on the earnest money deposit. It goes in the title company's trust account. That's a normal process here. So it's just going to sit there. The seller doesn't get to touch it. Only if you end up closing on the deal does the seller get that money. And it's a part of the purchase price. It goes towards your down payments and such. Excuse me. Now, I would say that in this market today, most of the properties that investors put offers on and contract on are still in rehab, right? Very rarely does a property make it all the way through rehab and get a tenant in there and then somebody buys it. It usually goes under contract well before that. If you insist on only buying a property or going under contract on a property where the rehab is complete and where a tenant is in place, that is possible to do through Norada. You're probably going to get left with the scraps, though. You're going to get left with the stuff that everybody else passed on, right? So you got to, like I said, you got to be 90% sure, and what protects you are those inspection and appraisal timelines. And we help you monitor that so that you don't run afoul of anything there. So, the average investor contracts on a property, and it's going to be 2 or 3 more weeks before the rehab is done. Because when you contract on it, the seller's crews are still in there tearing out all the old stinky cat pee carpet, right? Blowing out the cabinets, fixing plumbing, fixing a roof. They got a lot of stuff to do. So they're still working through that. And then they'll notify you that it's done. And then you have a certain period of time, once they notify you, to get a home inspection. And you can certainly reach out to us. We've got a lot of great home inspectors in each of these markets we can refer you to if you want us to, or you can find your own. The point is it needs to be an unbiased third-party inspector. Most inspectors charge about $300, I've found, and it's worth every penny. The inspector's going to go in there, he's going to go through that property top to bottom, and he's going to point out any red flags that he sees, and he's going to give you a report. Every single report, no matter how nice the property is, the inspector is going to find something. It's his job. But you can go ahead and forward that report on to me or to the seller and just say, hey, what can we do about this? And 9 times out of 10, the seller's going to agree to fix all of the items. And the inspector, for a small fee, will go out there and he'll verify that the items were fixed. So you get independent verification that that was dealt with. And about this same time, your lender is going to send an independent third-party appraiser to the property to make sure that it's worth at least what you're paying for it. Right? The bank is putting up 80% of the money here. They don't want you to overpay either. So this is what protects you from paying too much money for the property. Now, I have no influence. The seller doesn't. You don't. Nobody knows who this appraiser is going to be. Nobody gets to have any input there. It's a third-party, unbiased appraiser. 9 times out of 10, the appraisals come in okay, but every now and then one comes in too low. And if that happens for you, you and I are going to talk. Well, there's a few different courses of action that you can take there, and we'll discuss that. I don't bring it up now because most of the time it doesn't apply. But if it does, you'll know it, and you and I will have a conversation about what to do from there. After we get past the appraisal, it's going to be time for you to get insurance on the property, right? And I'll give you some insurance referrals, or you can go get your own, and we'll give you some pointers and some great podcast episodes that we've done on what good insurance policies for investment properties might look like, where we interview some licensed insurance agents who talk about that. You'll get that set up. They'll give you a quote, and then you'll get your insurance agent in touch with the lender, because the lender is going to have your insurance premium escrowed as a part of your monthly mortgage payment. Your taxes are also going to be escrowed for the most part. So when you write that mortgage check every month, you're also paying 1/12 of your annual tax and insurance estimates. So that way you don't have to have extra bills worrying about to get paid. Right around this time too, the seller is going to introduce you to the property management team. You're going to see the property management agreement and sign it. This is what allows them to collect rents on your behalf, to evict tenants, to send you money, to do all those things. And this is the time to look at it and make sure you're okay with it. For the most part, property managers charge anywhere from 8 to 10% of the gross rents collected. All right, so that's about what you can expect to pay, and sometimes it's a little lower. I don't see any that charge more than 10%, except in the instance of leasing and renewal fees. And turnkey investors hate lease-up fees. I've never met one that likes one. Unfortunately, they're a reality of the business in most places, right? So if you close on a property and the management team found a tenant before you closed, they likely will have already paid the lease-up fee because they have to pay a commission to the agents that brought that tenant to the table. But if you close on a property and for whatever reason it doesn't have a tenant yet and they find one, say, 3-4 weeks after you close, they're usually going to keep a good chunk, if not all of that first month's rent as a lease-up fee, right? So you need to be ready to know that, I might have to cover that $450 mortgage payment or whatever it is if they don't if they capture that lease-up fee. And down the road, if tenants renew, a lot of property managers have renewal fees for processing the paperwork. I hate those as much as you do. I think they're stupid, but property managers charge them. It's a fact of the business. So it's something you want to be familiar with going into a deal. What are the property management fees are going to be like so that you're not shocked or taken by surprise on anything? So that's something that you and I will make sure we talk about with the turnkey operator when we do our conference call with them, or when we're kind of in the due diligence portion of your purchase contract. And if you think, okay, well, I don't want to incur a lease-up fee, that's fine. You got to wait for properties that are leased prior to close. But once again, you're going to be left with the scraps, right? I think you buy based on quality neighborhood and good projections. And if you end up having to pay a lease-up fee, it's small potatoes in the long run. What matters most is a good property that tenants stay in and pay rents on. Right, that's what's going to make the biggest difference for you. So for closing, this is when the title company receives word from the lender that they have the clear to close. So all along this process that I've been explaining to you, the lender has probably been bugging you periodically for updated paperwork, new pay stubs, new bank statement, right? As the time goes by, new information comes out and they need that. And once they're satisfied, they've gone through underwriting, they'll issue the clear to close, they'll send their documents to the title company, and the title company will set up a mobile notary to meet you at home or Starbucks or the office or wherever you want to meet. That mobile notary will show up. They'll give you a letter from the title company that says, here's how much you owe. Basically, that's the balance of your closing costs and your down payment funds that you've got to send in. And they'll give you wiring instructions for how to send that to the title company. And then you're going to sit there with the notary for a little while and sign a whole stack of paperwork. They basically kill a tree and you sign a lot of papers, right? And the notary is going to notarize those and put them in a FedEx envelope and send them off to the title company. The title company will receive that. They'll record those documents with the county, and then they will give permission. Well, they'll get permission from the lender to fund, right? Once they have your money, the lender's money, they fund. And now you're the proud owner of a piece of turnkey real estate. And in a perfect world, you're just going to get rent checks every month, and you and I won't have anything to talk about other than how great everything is. But the world isn't perfect forever. Eventually, you're going to have a question. And if it's a question that you can't get answered from the property manager, or you don't get an answer you like, that's when you contact me. We don't ride off into the sunset when this is done. We're here to give you ongoing support. Because like I said, our interests are aligned. I want you to have a good experience. Because if you have a good experience, you're going to keep buying properties, and I make more money, right? Call me superficial, but it's something that I like to do, just like you do. Okay. So for the ongoing operation, most things the property management company will resolve, and they'll have a protocol in place. But if there's something that you're not sure about, you can always shoot me an email or call me, and I'll tell you, yeah, that's normal. We just got to wait for this to get over with. Or I'll tell you, you know what? That's ridiculous. That property manager sounds like a bonehead, and I'll help you straighten it out. And if we can't straighten it out, I'll help you switch. Doesn't happen often, but I have had to help investors do it before. So there you go. That is an earful. We talked about a lot of stuff, but I wanted to kind of educate you from the high level as to what turnkey investing with Norada is about. I really, really recommend that you check out Marco's podcast at passiverealestateinvesting.com. He interviews insurance, property suppliers, managers, lenders, all different kinds of people that give more help about this whole process. In fact, I did an episode with him. It's at the bottom of my email signature, called What to Expect in Turnkey Investing. And it's where I go into even more depth with Marco on many of these questions that we answered throughout our video today. So go there to passiverealestateinvesting.com. Like I said, the episode I did with him is called What to Expect when investing in turnkey property. And then set up a time to chat with me, right? If you think, okay, I'm ready to do this, I have a few cleanup questions, or there's some things about my individual situation that I want to talk to Steve about, then just click on the calendar link at the bottom of my email, or shoot me an email, steve@noradarealestate.com, steve@noradarealestate.com, and let's get something on the calendar and let's get you started. Thanks again for your time today. Happy investing.